Item 3 on the agenda, House File 737, and this is a bill by Representative Bjorn Olson, and I will bring this before the committee, sir, for consideration. And it is House File 737 to be brought before the committee to be referred to the Committee on Environment, Finance, and Policy. Representative Olson, welcome to the committee. If you'll background the committee on the bill, we'll proceed accordingly. Perfect. Representative Olson, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So House File 737 is one of those situations where I'm not an artist. I've seen a couple paintings in my life, but I got a phone call from a constituent who said, Representative Olson, I cannot make my product any longer in the state of Minnesota. I said, whoa, what are you talking about? He says, well, I make cadmium pastels. So you know how you can go and buy your oil pastels, and you can get a whole big 99 different color pastels for $10. So he makes the cadmium-based ones, and he says, I can't make it in Minnesota any longer. This was back in July. And I said, what are you talking about? Well, the state inadvertently or advertently just made it so they made a blanket statement that said everything is now against the law, which there is good reason. Cadmium is a heavy metal. Lead's a heavy metal. We all know this. But what it did is it inadvertently excluded every single art supply that uses cadmium for it. Now, Western art culture is highly dependent on cadmium-based pastels, paints, and other items. I talked to an artist here in St. Paul, and he said that half of the colors that he uses in his profession he can no longer purchase in the state of Minnesota. And so this professional artist can't perform his duties and make art for us to enjoy. And so I looked at it, I said, well, this isn't okay. I looked into it. He explained to me that the way that they produce the cadmium-based stuff today is an incredibly safe way of doing it, whereas if you had consumed or inadvertently consumed cadmium paint in the 1940s and 50s, you would have had a real big problem. Today, you would basically just send out the same color that you consumed. That's exactly what he told me in other words. So it's a relatively safe, it's much safer than it used to be. And we really need to ensure that Western art culture continues in the state of Minnesota. We're the only government in the entire universe that doesn't exempt it for this purpose. You go to the European Union. The European Union has said that cadmium's illegal. They can't make cadmium-based products, and then they have an asterisk that says for the purpose of art supplies. And so we really need to do this today and send this off to the Environment Committee. Mr. Chair, I do have an amendment, an author's amendment to.
Representative Olson, is yours the A2 amendment?
It is.
I will move the A2 amendment to House File 737 for Representative Olson to get the bill in the form he wishes. All those in favor of the A2 amendment signify by saying aye. Oh, I'm sorry. Representative Katiza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm totally fine with author's amendments, but this one just seems a little bit more expansive given the introduction that you just kind of walked us through, it being with paint, and there adds a number of other exceptions. So I'm hoping you could just give us a little bit more background on some of the other items listed here.
Representative Olson.
Perfect. Thank you, Representative. I really appreciate that question. So this is an amendment that looks very similar to the one that the Senate adopted last week in the Commerce Committee. So when we first drafted it, I'm like, I didn't know a whole lot about art. And so you can see the original one basically just exempts paint or pastels containing cadmium. Apparently there's a lot of other art supplies that are necessary. And so I was working with some very intelligent people who know about the art industry, and they added a significant number of cadmium. And then with regard to the ink pens and mechanical pencils, there are high class, like specialty pencils and specialty pens that do contain some lead in the ballpoint and that kind of stuff. So there is, in fact, some lead in pens. And then striking the keys, basically just that is an issue that when they're soldering the electronic components within the key fob, they use lead for that. And so whereas you don't really want your kids to suck on keys anyways, because when I look at if one of my child were to be sucking on my keys, I would say the flu. I wouldn't necessarily say lead poisoning. But at the same time, there is no current alternative for that. And so we think that's a pretty important thing to exempt as well.
Representative Katiza, to follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that. I was a little bit confused about the ink pens and mechanical pencils, but if they're in terms of more of an art supply, but is that kind of those types of things that our students use in schools, and might be like chewing on the cap, or is there has the MPACA been been in conversation about this amendment when they presented over in the Senate? Do you know that?
They were.
Representative Olson.
So sorry, Mr. Chair. They were in fact, they had conversations with the Senate when this amendment was. They actually testified in there, and I think we've got someone here today who's to testify, and they can maybe provide a little bit more information on, from my understanding, the ink pen in the ballpoint. They might have some lead in it, depending on how it is. I don't know if that's a Bic pen or if that is a specialty fountain pen. I'm not entirely sure.
Representative Katizo-Tune, follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If the MPCA is here, that would be helpful for me to hear from them before we move forward on the A2, if that's all right.
Representative Olson, maybe what we should do is get the bill in the form that you want it, and then maybe we can start taking some of those other questions, because it's probably getting into more of the technical aspects of that.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are you okay with that, Representative Katizo-Tune? Okay. With that, all those in favor of the author's A2 amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, the motion prevails. To the bill as amended, Representative Olson, do you have some testifiers today that will speak to the bill as amended?
We do have a number of testifiers, Mr. Chair.
Oh, hang on. Representative Smith.
We do have one more amendment to move. Do you want to wait?
We can take that, and we can take it at the end. I will defer to the author of how he would like to do that. I'm open to whatever.
I just didn't want to pass by.
Yep,
amendments
nope,
without-
nope, it's not, it's on my list, and I've got it right here. And we can take it now if that's the wishes of the author and yourself. I know it's an amendment that you two have been working on. I'm fine, with however you want to do it. Representative
Chair.
Olson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It is an amendment that I've been talking with Representative Smith about. Let's get our testimony, and then we can discuss the amendment and take the amendment.
Fine.
I'm not gonna
Representative
fight the
Smith, you okay with that?
That's fine, yeah.
All right, thank you. To the bill as amended, the first testifier I have on my list is Darren Riney, who is an artist, and if he is present today, we'll have him come forward and provide testimony. And sir, is it Riney or Rini? I
Rini.
apologize. Mr. Rini, I would invite you and thank you for coming to the committee today. If you will go ahead and state your name for the record and then provide your testimony for the committee. Again, welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, representatives. Again, my name is Darren Riney. I'm here with my business partner, Scott Fairs, who is the fellow that's not Representative Olson. We're the co-owners of Wet Paint Artist Materials and Framing. We're a retail art supply store on Grand Avenue in St. Paul. We will be celebrating 50 years of serving our community next year. But the inclusion of professional art supplies in the Minnesota law meant to protect children and families from lead and cadmium makes us wonder if we will be in business much past that. We are already feeling the impact of this law at the cash register. Artist paint and associated supplies make up 30% of our annual sales. As one of the few independent art supply shops left in the state, this lead and cadmium ban puts us at risk of losing a significant portion of these sales to competitors in other states, including just a half hour from our front door. We have already lost much of our online market share nationally since lead and cadmium-based colors are freely sold in all other states, even California. Lead and cadmium-based colors are essential tools on the artist's palette. Lead white is flexible and durable. It's the reason so many painted portraits have lasted centuries. Cadmium colors are warm and opaque, and uniquely soften when mixed with other colors. They're the best at representing the effects of natural light. Painters and instructors, our customers at Wet Paint, stake their livelihoods on the availability of these colors. Every tube of artist paint is clearly labeled with its contents because the properties of each pigment or blend of pigments are critical for the artist. Lead and cadmium are not used in artist paints as a secret filler the way they might be when hidden in kids' toys and jewelry. They are prized for their specific characteristics. Painters pay a premium for these colors because their unique properties cannot be duplicated by other pigments. If there were viable alternatives, we'd already be selling them because these are expensive colors. These are not cheap pigments used in art supplies for children. Importantly, the question of banning lead and cadmium-based artist colors was already asked and answered years ago by the EU. As Bill Moran will later testify, the science does not support this ban. Minnesota, home to one of the most vibrant art scenes in the country, according to exploreminnesota.com, is the only place in the world where artists and art supply manufacturers are banned from using these critically important tools due to the overreach of Bill HF 2310. we hope this will be remedied soon. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to the bill as well?
No, I worked with this statement with Darren.
Okay, okay. Members, questions of the testifier this morning? Seeing none and hearing none, thank you for your time. And
you.
we'll move on to our next testifier, Kirk Kudalka from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. And as he is making his way to the testifier's table, I do want to give you an update. We're still experiencing some technical difficulties with Representative Kosnick, and Representative Nolan West of the committee has also joined us via Zoom for full disclosure for everyone present, including members. Welcome to the committee. If you'll identify yourself and proceed with your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Kirk Kudalka. I'm Assistant Commissioner with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the bill. I did want to go over a little bit of history on the bill, the law that was passed a few years ago and had gone through the legislative sessions twice, just to explain why certain products are on there. What we have concern of the list is the items are because they have high lead and cadmium amounts. And even small amounts of lead and cadmium in household products can cause serious problems for children and others. No amount of lead is considered safe in children. High levels of lead can cause behavioral problems, short attention spans, slower growth, and decreased coordination. And because many people know about the harm of lead, what happens is cadmium is often used as a replacement. And that's why the law is a lead and cadmium bill, particularly in inexpensive jewelry. In many cases, there are alternatives which are safer. However, cadmium dust can cause vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain, muscle aches, and organ damage. The Department of Health leads lead risk assessments at home and looks at the data. And while it does look at really at 1 and 2 year olds, we know there are exposures to much older children. And from the data that from our Department of Health, along with the city of New York and King County in Washington, there are some common consumer products that end up when they look at investigations of why there are elevated levels of lead in blood. Those include ceramics, keys, chalk, jewelry, pots and pans, and costume jewelry items, which is why the list consists of what it is currently in law. What I'd like to focus a little bit of time on is where there are alternatives. And so we were asked by the legislature last year to do a report on a number of items that are in the amendment, including mechanical pencils and pens. What we really want to stress is the full exemptions of these laws to really stop the drive to innovation and where there are alternatives. The report outlines, for instance, where there are alternatives for the lead component of pens being made. There can be a transition to it and make sure there are supplies there. And in the use of mechanical pencils, there are many types of pencils that do not include lead that are available. So the question is, why continue with lead when we know we have safe alternatives? When we look at keys, we also see similar pieces with key fobs where we know there are non-lead solder. And I know much of the conversation so far has been about the direct exposure to these products, but we're also looking about the production phase where the workers and neighbors and releases from facilities with lead, and also on the disposal side when we're looking at what is in landfills or wastewater treatment plants and having to deal with it. And that's where something such as solder becomes an issue because they do deteriorate when in the landfill. When we look at keys and that, we do see alternatives in blades. The Department of Health had done a study, for example, where only 20% of vehicle keys have lead in it compared to other types of keys. There is an alternative. There are businesses doing the act of making keys with not having the risk of lead in it, which is one of those things the Department of Health has seen as high levels of exposure for children. That's why we believe that we want to have conversations about is there additional time that are needed to make sure that we find and move to that full adoption of those safer alternatives. I know there will be conversations about, well, the test used the machine, XRF machine will be referred to as, that it's just the coating, it's masking it. It's not. We've used examples of keys that we knew clearly had lead, had the coating on it, and the machine had no problem detecting the lead. We can carve off part of the coating, so we have a non-coated and coated. The machine picks it up the same on both sides. We use this machine for many times to also send it to the lab to do additional tests. And we have found consistently across product lines it be consistent. The Department of Health uses it in homes to find lead under multiple layers of architectural paint to be able to determine it. They're proven models. There are alternatives out there. And what we'd like to continue to work with folks, and we have meetings with a number of the organizations that you'll hear from today, of let's learn more about the alternatives and how do we move that way when we know there are existing alternatives. Thank you, Chair and committee members, for the amount of time today.
Thank you for your time as well, sir. Any questions for the testifier this morning? Members? All right, thank you. Our next testifier is Josh Fisher from the Alliance of Automotive Innovation. And again, as Mr. Fisher is making his way, an update, we are now also joined on Zoom by Lead Her, in addition to Representative West. Welcome to the committee. If you'll state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Chair O'Driscoll, members of the committee, my name is Josh Fisher with the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. We are a trade association that represent the automakers producing the most vehicles sold in the U.S. We also represent auto suppliers, mobility, and technology companies. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today, and thank you to Representative Olson for his leadership on this issue. Vehicle keys and key fobs are covered by the lead and cadmium law, a well-intentioned law that is overly broad and does need to be adjusted. Auto Innovators has taken a deep look into lead and cadmium in keys and key fobs and provided that information to PCA as they developed their report. Auto Innovators recommends lifting the ban on lead and cadmium in keys and key fobs. We view this as a common sense approach which will align Minnesota with the rest of the United States. Banning lead and cadmium in keys when there are no alternatives available in sufficient quantities should not be a high priority since exposure risk for these items appears to be minimal. With regard to electronic fobs, the lead in the fobs is in the interior electrical components that are not easily accessible. With regard to the minor lead and the brass content of keys, many keys are plated with other metals to change their color, and the brass is expected to be on the interior of the key. There are other regulatory structures in place to minimize the exposure risk from keys and automotive key fobs, and Minnesota's law is not consistent with those other regulatory structures. As mentioned in the report, California's 2001 settlement on lead content in keys effectively brought the lead content on keys down to below 1.5%. At which point warnings of risk to Californians are not required. Additionally, the European Union's End-of-Life Vehicles Directive governs the presence of lead and cadmium in the vehicle components, including keys, and sets low thresholds for those substances' use. We recommend that Minnesota consider aligning standards for lead and keys with these provisions. Being out of line with California in the EU is certainly a decision, and we would think it'd be much better for Minnesota to align themselves with these other structures. So we encourage the House to adopt this amendment. It's a common sense approach that will head off disruptions that will occur should the ban go into effect. So in conclusion, Auto Innovators believes that amendments to Minnesota's lead and cadmium and keys law will lead to more effective implementation of the statute and improve workability and feasibility of the law for the industry. Thank you for your time and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Members, questions of Mr. Fisher this morning? Representative Katiza-Watun.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for being here with us, Mr. Fisher. I appreciate your testimony. I'm just looking for a little bit of clarity. Since this bill has been passed, what has the industry been doing with the keys and keychains and key rings? When I'm reading the existing statute, it says that it doesn't apply to covered products if they have that coating that I think our last testifier from the MPCA mentioned, because that is preempted by federal law. So I'm curious, like, is that how it's been working so far, or you've already found a solution and now we want to go backwards in terms of consumer protections? I'm missing what's.
Sure. So,
Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Chair, Representative, key blades and key fobs do contain lead and cadmium. And our understanding is that automotive keys, the thresholds of lead and cadmium are above the standard currently in Minnesota law. And so we are covered. And that's why last year requested an extension of 1 year so we could actually deliver new vehicles to the state. Otherwise, we could not deliver vehicles because if you can't deliver a key, you can't drive the vehicle. So we needed the 1 year extension. And the auto industry is always looking for better and safer alternatives. We've taken mercury switches out of vehicles, mercury out of headlamps, chromium out of nuts and bolts. So we're always looking to innovate, but Our members have told us there is no replacement available, especially for key fobs. The heat, when you're soldering the heat, you have to move the circuit boards further apart, and that's really tough in a small key fob. So, the standards in California and the EU are still strict standards. The challenge is Minnesota's standard is much higher than those. And so our keys are out of compliance here in Minnesota when they're not out of compliance anywhere else, frankly, in the world. Similar to the paint argument, right? So that's where we are. So we're always looking for safer alternatives. They just do not exist right now. And we believe these other thresholds do provide safety and protection for consumers and a level of achievability for the industry.
Representative Chair Katiz-Votoun.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for that. That's helpful for me to just clarify a little bit with that one-year extension and just kind of get all the ducks in a row. I do want to note for the record, Mr. Chair, that a Republican has brought a bill that wants to bring Minnesota in line with California. And I am just shocked. Shocked.
Representative Katiz-Votoun, I can answer that in a couple of different ways this morning. It may well be the weather. It may also be even the blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while, as the old cliche goes. But I will defer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Heisman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Representative Katiz-Votoun. You might want to join the Environment Committee. This happens actually quite frequently after some of the legislation that passed last year, so it's not that big of a surprise.
We all learn something, don't we? Other questions for Mr. Fisher this morning? Thank you, Mr. Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And with that, we're going to go to the next testifier,
Mr. Chair.
Bill Morgan. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Kresha.
I'm sorry, my apologies. And to the
Oh,
testifier.
do you want the testifier? Representative Kresha, did you want the testifier back? Do you want Mr. Fisher back?
Well,
or-
we'll see if the bill author can. So to the bill author, are you aware of any pending lawsuits right now?
Representative Olson.
I'm not aware of any. Maybe Mr. Fisher is.
Mr. Fisher, did you hear the question? Would you like Representative Kresha to repeat the question?
Mr. Chair, could you please repeat the question, Representative?
Representative Kresha.
Thank you. So in the research I did, I do not see any active lawsuits against this. It looks like you're just taking the right proactive steps. Am I correct in that, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Chair, Representative, we're talking about lawsuits specifically in Minnesota. Yeah, because last year when the legislature passed the extension, so to delay the implementation of this ban, but that expires, I believe, July of this year. So at that point, we expect to be out of compliance, and I would imagine there could potentially be lawsuits following that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Fisher. And our next testifier is Bill Morgan from the Arts and Creative Materials Institute and the Written Instrument Manufacturing Association. That's a lot to say this morning. Mr. Morgan, welcome to the committee. If you'll state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's Bill Moran, no G. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for taking my testimony today. As the chairman has indicated, I am legal counsel for the Art and Creative Materials Institute and for the Writing Instrument Manufacturers Association. I'm going to be focusing on Amendment A2 and specifically lines 1.2 through 1.7. I think as we've kind of developed through this, and you've heard from Mr. Kudelka from the MPCA, we've had dialogue with Mr. Kudelka through the Writing Instrument Manufacturers Association. We are in the process of engaging with the MPCA on behalf of the Art and Creative Materials Institute with regard to the paints and pastels, but I'd like to address both of those issues. This legislation was passed in 2023. If we go through the legislative history, there's very little information regarding the scope of this statute. There is a litany of 15 different broad product definitions that come into play that are effectively banned by the statute. In 2024, we did have dialogue with MPCA. A moratorium was instituted for this year, similar to the keys. And there was a study done by the MPCA. No scientific analysis was done with regard to pens and mechanical pencils. Those were the only items that were part of that moratorium. As the individual on behalf of the auto industry indicates, that ban expires on July 1st, 2025 of this year. With regard to pens and mechanical pencils, I've submitted some materials for the committee, including some scientific studies that were done. At this point, this MPCA has not come forward with any scientific studies to establish that pens and mechanical pencils present any measurable health risk to the population and to children in particular. With regard to pens and other writing instruments, this issue came up before the Consumer Product Safety Commission in the late 2010s, early 2010s. Study was done, and the Consumer Product Safety Commission did not include pens within their ban or limitation on lead with regard to children's products. With regard to the mechanical pencils, again, small amount of lead in those. Those mechanical pencils are high-end pencils. Those are pencils that are used by engineers and architects and others, draftsmen, in connection with their profession. These are not children's products. These are not products that are made available to children. And so right now, for an organization that leans into the science, which the MPCA should do, they chose not to consider the science here. Similarly, with regard to pens, or with regard to the paints and the professional artist materials, as Mr. Rennie indicated, the European Union conducted a study back in the 2013-2014 timeframe, specifically addressing cadmium in professional artist materials and paints at the request of the country of Sweden to ban cadmium in professional artist paints. They conducted a study when that request for a ban occurred and concluded that there was no measurable health risk from cadmium in professional artist materials and refused the ban. Here we have it turned on its head. Under this statute, under 325E3892, we have a ban first with no studies. And now we have to conduct studies after the fact in order to trim down this statute, in order to have it recognize the practicalities and the impact on the state of Minnesota. With this ban, if it goes into effect with regard to pens and mechanical pencils, we're the only place in the world that you can't buy a Bic pen with a small amount of lead in the tip. You can't buy any paints with cadmium in them, although right now the ban is in effect with regard to artist materials. So for those reasons, we would request that you approve this Amendment A2 and pass it along for further consideration. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Members, questions for the testifier? Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Seeing no questions. Our final testifier who has signed up in advance, Dave Johnson. And then if there's any members of the public that are here or wishing to testify, they also can let us know, and we will give you an opportunity to testify this morning as well. So, Mr. Johnson, and then members of the public. Mr. Johnson, welcome to the committee. If you'll state your name for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Dave Johnson. I'm a partner at the Faegre Drinker Law Firm, and thank you for the opportunity to both submit a written letter and to testify before the committee today on the amendment. And to clarify, the amendment does remove keys from the ban, so it isn't just the key solder, but it's also keys. I represent two key manufacturers, Dormicaba and JMA USA, who together constitute approximately 60% of the United States key market, and the Hillman Group, a nationwide distributor of keys and hardware supplies. As has been previously testified, the lead and cadmium ban enacted in 1993 prohibits a number of consumer products, primarily children's products, but also applies to keys. And as currently written, that legislation bans every blade-style key and key fob in the state. In addition, that law bans selling keys for house, office, and business use, sold with newer used cars, boats, motorcycles, ATVs, UTVs, golf carts, agricultural machinery, or other motorized vehicles utilizing a key. And there are representatives of those groups who are here today in support of the amendment. It also prohibits selling keys with office furniture with locking drawers, locking toolboxes, truck toolboxes, work trucks with keys, industrial equipment, refrigerators or freezers that have keys, padlocks, and any other application where a key is sold with a product. In sum, all of those are currently not in compliance with Minnesota law. As background, almost all metal keys are made of purchased or smelted brass, which contains lead levels between 0.95% and 1.5%. It is used because of its balance between strength and use and its ability to be machine cut. The lead and brass facilitates machinability and is not easily corroded. Key cores and key blades need to be of the same alloy so that the hardness of the two metals match in operation. If one is harder than the other, damage will occur. Either the key core will become too hard or the softer key and the key becomes deformed, misshapen, or breaks. The key blade is too hard and it destroys the rotor mechanism. Either way, without matching materials, the likelihood of lock functioning is greatly increased. No other state, with the exception of California, bans keys or lead and cadmium content in keys. And our standard currently in effect is significantly more stringent than the California standard, which the industry has met. I do want to talk a little bit about alternatives. We do not believe there are commercially viable alternatives on the currently in use or available anytime soon. As was previously testified, DHS did do a study regarding keys using a surface testing method. That study stated that keys are not intended for kids and has been characterized, I think, in this committee and in previous committees as saying that there are alternatives that exist, and that's what this study proves. In the Senate hearing, in the other body, I don't know how we refer to it here, the testimony was that there were detectable levels of lead found in 64% of objects, so around 35 to 36 did not show having lead in the key blades. There was further testimony, so they concluded that there was currently a market. I would just say this about the XRF testing method. Not only is it not the method used in the study, it is not the method that the PCA has publicly said that it uses for compliance. That's an acid digestion method that analyzes the entire key, but that the industry characterizes an XRF testing method as a surface-sensitive test, meaning it only analyzes the surface content of an object. And for this method to be an accurate reflection of an entire sample, the surface needs to be representative of the entire volume of the sample. In the case of silver and nickel-plated keys analyzed in the DHS study, it is not. Many keys, most notably automotive keys, when this was previously testified to as well, are made of brass and are silver or nickel-plated. With these plated keys, the surface material contains minimal or no lead, while the brass content of the core is masked. This appears to be the case in the DHS study, as vehicle keys have a significantly lower lead detection rate than door keys. The DHS study further proves the point when it notes the relative difference in lead detection rates is significantly more in gold keys than in silver, since silver keys are silver or nickel-plated and gold keys are not. In both instances, the core metal is the same. We've actually, one of the clients has actually taken the plated keys and done more intensive analysis to show, again, that the core of all of those keys has lead and brass content that would be above Minnesota's standard. And so, we've had a number of conversations with the department starting late last year, a lot of discussion about what the alternatives are. And the testimony today by the MPCA is that alternatives have existed. For months, we've asked them to identify what those are, and they have not identified what they believe the alternatives are. They've asked us to go identify what we believe the alternatives are, and we've engaged in extensive research, not only through the law firm's scientific database, but both the manufacturers and the distributor have searched, for any literature it could find. It's found one study currently being conducted in Europe, which we have shared with the department, that shows the partial results of the beginning of their trying to identify an alternative. And what that study has found, and we have shared it with the department and happy to share it with The committee is that overall, the lead-containing reference material and the lead-reduced materials at above 1% show some good machinability and broaching. Any lead-reduced alloy with lead content less than 1% proved to be unsuitable for the production of the cylinder cores. And every single alloy that these folks could identify as a possible alternative is currently non-compliant with Minnesota law. So our testimony is that there are no alternatives currently on the market, and there are none for the foreseeable future. And if we are not able to change the law, one of two things will happen. Currently, all keys in the state of Minnesota will currently continue to be non-compliant, or all key sales to the state of Minnesota will have to cease. So we look forward to having conversations with policymakers, with the MPCA, and others, and hopefully we can find a path forward, because I don't think any of us want that. So with that, I'm happy to answer any testimony or questions.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. I don't have any member questions at this time. Representative Perryman.
I have a question regarding the chain, manufacturers down to retail. What will that do to retailers that are currently, and I am one of them, I feel like I should be a testifier today, that sell key fobs, that repair key fobs? We take the shells, we do it responsibly, and sometimes we get ladies and men going, thank goodness you do it. So how will that trickle down to the retail? Will we be accountable to take it all out the service, or is that going to be the position or the responsibility of the manufacturers?
Mr. Johnson, before I have you answer, I'm hoping that your answers can be brief, because we do have some other bills ahead of us here today. Mr. Johnson.
Currently, the law prohibits either the sale, distribution, or offer of use for any keys with lead and cadmium above those percentage levels. So the distribution would be illegal, my understanding is, so would any sale or other use. That'd be my take.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Representative Faulkner.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Representative Olson. I'm just wondering, have you worked with the MPCA on addressing the concerns for the products?
Representative Faulkner, is it a question to the bill author or to the testifier?
Author, please.
Okay. If you don't mind, we take public testimony, then we're going to go right into
Oh, sorry, I thought
discussion
we
of
were
the
at
bill.
the
So
discussion point.
if it's okay, then I wanted to also take Representative Smith. We're close, real close. All right?
Jumping at the bit.
Is there anyone from the public who wishes to testify on the matter before the committee? House File 373 as amended. Anyone wishing to testify on that? All right. Let's take the A3 amendment, and then we'll go to member testimony on the bill once we've got it in its entirety. And Representative Faulkner, you will be the first. Representative Smith, to your A3 amendment, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to move the A3 amendment. I've talked with the author about this. This is specifically on the cadmium paint that was discussed earlier before those other. This is putting an age restriction on that. 18, prove that you are an adult when you buy these. One, to make sure that children aren't exposing themselves to this cadmium paint when they maybe don't know about it like professional artists do. But also, adult artists will be much more responsible in washing the cadmium paint, and so this paint doesn't get into wastewater. So hopefully it's viewed as a friendly amendment, and that's what the amendment does.
Representative Smith, we're about to find out if it's friendly or
We'll
not.
see.
To the bill author.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So whereas I don't know if, I think Hobby Lobby, I think that Michaels would easily be able to make this happen. Mike, I would love it if we could have the testifiers from a small business come up and tell us how that would affect them, to have to check.
Very quickly, Representative Olson, if we could have them come up, and I don't want to do like the essay of like 100 words or less kind of a thing, but 100 words or less would be fabulous this morning. Welcome back to the committee. If you'll state your name, and then I can have Representative Smith or Representative Olson repeat the question if you need it. Go ahead.
It's fine.
Okay.
Darren Rennie from Wet Paint, again. Very quickly. Wow. It doesn't make any difference. It's adults buying the paint. I cannot think of a time in my 30-plus years history selling art supplies that I've had anyone under 18 purchasing a cadmium-based color. They're expensive. The kids coming in to buy paint are not looking to buy this paint. So if this is going to get it across the goal line, sure. But we maintain that the science doesn't support it regardless. But it's neither here nor there.
Representative Olson.
Well, then I would find that as a friendly amendment if it's going to get this bill across the aisle.
Representative Heinzman, Chair Heinzman.
Mr. Chair, I apologize for dragging this out longer, but I am curious, and this may be a discussion for another committee, but what would be the penalty if someone were to have made a mistake? If this amendment was adopted, would we have retailers potentially being held to the same level that, say, another retailer would be for selling cigarettes to a minor? Or what are we talking about exactly? We're talking about paint at the moment, but I'm not entirely sure what the penalties might look like. I'm not clear on that if we were to adopt this amendment.
Representative Heinzman, there is no reference to other statute for penalty in it, but I will go to the amendment author and ask him what he was contemplating. Representative Smith.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. There's no specific statute I'm referencing here, but it's enforced by the department. If there's complaints, I imagine it'll go through a similar process.
Representative Chair Heinzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Until there's some kind of clarification on what that penalty would actually look like, I would be a no. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Katiza-Watun.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do have a nice law book here right in front of me. The enforcement section of the existing law, 325E.3892, is subdivision 3, and the PCA has enforcement over the existing statute. So I don't know if a violation were to be reported, what the MPCA would do, and if the testifier is still here, I don't know if he could.
Representative Katiza-Watun, I do not question your research, but I do want to just get confirmation for the committee's benefit from nonpartisan staff, if we
Right.
could.
That's helpful, thank you.
And I believe that Ms. Pompu is joining us via Zoom this morning as well.
Aaron members, I am. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Ms. Pompu.
Yes, the citation from Representative Katiza-Watun is right. That subdivision 3 of that section is the enforcement section. It can be enforced by the PCA, Commerce, or Health. They would coordinate on it, and there's a variety of enforcement statutes that it cross-references, including the Commissioner of Commerce's ability, subpoena ability, fine ability, and the Attorney General's ability.
Representative Heinzman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the testimony from nonpartisan. I would just point out that in some cases, MPCA enforces fines for some things that you would think would be maybe not very serious in the upwards of $10,000. I'm just suggesting it'd be nice to have more clarification on that. I'm not sure this amendment's ready for prime time. A disclaimer, a number of other alternatives might be a better choice.
Representative Olson, your wishes.
We're going to environment next, and so I think we can take the amendment here, because if it's going to get, I mean, right now, to Representative Katiza-Watun's comment, it's not only a Republican trying to align with California, it's actually a Republican working with 2 DFL members, so I'm actually outnumbered 67% to 33. So if we could take the amendment now, and then we can work on it again, make sure that we get any penalties to ensure that it's not a $10,000 fine for selling one $80 tube of paint to a highly enthused 17-year-old, I think that we can do that. We'll figure it out in environment, and we'll take it, figure it out in environment, and send it to the floor.
All right, no follow-up questions with that. Any other comments from the amendment author?
I mean, maybe just to say, because the ability of this, the importance of this, I mean, so the reference to the cadmium paint report from the EU has been made. I struggled with this. I read that report, and while they chose not to ban this, it does say that if we banned cadmium paint, there would be 16 fewer cases of breast cancer a year. So this is like something that has been studied and shown like there are effects, which is why I think it's important to keep it out of the hands of kids. We've heard that kids probably won't get this anyway in most cases. I think this is a pretty good amendment to have in place.
To the A3 amendment offered by Representative Smith, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, the motion prevails, and the bill is now amended with the A3 amendment. No public testifiers. Any other committee discussion? Seeing none and hearing none? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, you were. Yes, I will be good. Go ahead, Representative Faulkner. This is your first time speaking to the committee, so we're just dying to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so just with the number of concerns that, and thank you, Representative Olson. Just the number of concerns the MPCA has brought up, I was just wondering if you had worked with them ahead of time during the drafting or before bringing this to the bill, or to the committee.
Representative Olson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the question. I did in fact sit down with the MPCA, one of their representatives. We had a conversation and we identified that the entire focus of this was children's health. And so the concept is how do we ensure that we exempt products that adults use that are, you know, continuing Western art culture, making sure you can drive your cars, all those kind of things, while still protecting children. So there's been, that has, and to Representative Smith's amendment, that's been a primary focus of mine as well, is to ensure that our children are not, you know, getting cadmium-based lead paint on their McDonald's toy kind of an idea, like what was happening in the 90s. So yeah, I have had those conversations. They still, you know, they have their position, and I think we need to move a little bit from their position, but we still need to keep the focus on children.
Sure. Representative Faulkner.
Yeah, just, I'll be quick. I know we've got more business to get to. I just want to know, and perhaps the MPCA testifier could come up to help with this too. But my question is, if are there any policies in place for disposal of the cadmium paints, treating it as hazardous waste, or how? I just want to know if it's okay if people are just washing their brushes down the sink, if they're wiping their brushes off and the paper towel has that and just throwing it in the garbage, or if they're supposed to treat the waste of this differently.
Mr. Delco, welcome back. If you'll identify yourself and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Kirk Adelka with the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I would need to get back to you on that. You know, the greater concern that we're at is that physical touch when we're talking about this specific paint. Folks, the paint is usually in art spaces that are shared with multiple age groups, and you know, there's that concern.
Representative Faulkner.
Sure. Yeah, I guess my concern on this is not that kids are buying expensive tubes of paint and then, you know, it's just what happens in the wastewater treatment and the landfills, et cetera, when these toxic chemicals, heavy metals are being introduced into the environment. So the impetus of my question. I was also wondering, I guess this for the bill author and regarding the amendment, why are we lumping paint in with keys? These seem to be two drastically different topics. I mean, I'm sympathetic to the paint argument. Our oldest child is a budding artist looking to go to art school, so we're in the middle of trying to plan, you know, tours, and I get that. My dad was a potter, and the glazes, cadmium produces, you know, reds and oranges, and so I fully understand that. So I'm just wondering, but then when we take a look at the auto industry, this is a completely different industry, different animal, different monster as far as regulations and how these products are used. So to me, it kind of feels like we introduced this as on the research, and the original intent of the bill was paint, almost like a Trojan horse to just kind of stick keys in there as well and wrapping in the auto industry. So just wondering why we've combined the two.
Representative Olson.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question. So this amendment minus the new one that we just took on made the bill almost exactly like what the Senate was doing. And so just making same and similars easier. And also the fact that this bill that was originally passed 2 years ago included all those things together. And so it fits very perfectly to say, well, this was a little bit overarching. Concept was to protect children. That's exactly what we want to do. Let's make a couple exemptions. Here's the list of exemptions to this one bill that was a little bit overarching.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Final follow-up, sir.
Very small.
Yep, go ahead, Representative.
I'm just wondering, as we work forward and go toward the Environment Committee next, of which I'll get to see you again, just wondering if we can just get a commitment to work with the MPCA again, just kind of sorting out some of these issues before we get to the Environment Committee.
Is that question to the testifier or the bill
Yes,
author?
the
Or
author.
we should say member
Yep.
from the MPCA.
Sorry, for the author, sorry.
Go ahead,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Olson.
Yeah, I will have another meeting with the MPCA between now and the environment, and we'll see if we can kind of hammer out some of this stuff, find a little bit of working ground. I think that the age restriction, if that's going to make people feel okay about this cadmium, I'm very devoted to the concept of ensuring that Western art culture continues in our state. I think a lot of us are. I think we still need to be able to drive our cars. We still need to be able to do that. And so I'll have another conversation with them and see if there's some wiggle room, something that we can do to make everyone feel good about this. But at the end of the day, we really, really need to continue driving our cars, riding with our pencils, and keep Western art culture thriving in the state of Minnesota.
And with that, I will renew my motion that House File 737, as amended, be re-referred to the Committee on Environment, Finance, and Policy. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? The motion prevails. Representative Olson, you are on your way.